Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Yuri. I'm a longtime Drupal developer, and I'm also working on a visual regression testing tool. And I would like today to talk about the testing, visual testing in general. And I will give an overview of what tools are available out there, the differences are. And I hope we will have some time in the end for the demo as well. That will be a small thing of the presentation. I would really love to focus on use cases when it makes sense to use tool like Diffie or any other visual regression testing tools. Um, so, Emily, shall I go ahead and start sharing my screen and start
Yes,
going through the
please.
presentation? Okay.
Perfect.
All right. So this is the screen that I would like to share. And this is a slide about me. So pretty recently, my account turned 18 years old. So that's an interesting date. And as I already mentioned to Emily, I was presenting in Stanford a few times in the past in person. So I hope that will happen again soon. So a few things about the visual regression testing and testing in general. So there are multiple things in your web project that you can test. And when usually you talk to people, they are referencing to testing one of two things. Either it's a manual testing when someone actually goes in and check the website, open the pages, does some submitting forms, validating that the site didn't break. So that is manual testing. And then people also, when you ask them about testing, they think about testing automation. And that is like all the unit testing, functional testing, everything that kind of like machines run against your website and give you some validation that it works properly. So visual regression testing is an interesting thing because it's kind of like in the middle between the both. It's not a manual thing, but it automates the manual steps of opening pages and making sure that they look okay. But it doesn't check the functional part of it. More, of course, accurate to say, it doesn't check everything functionally, because still in functional testing, you want to run certain functions and then you want to check the arguments and results, and you do way more, but on way more granular level. So visual regression testing, in my understanding, is something that is kind of in the middle that can be run also by non-technical people. That makes it very valuable and attractive to get started. So there are a few use cases that we saw being used. And for example, you want to test your site visually when you do any code changes. So it can be, let's say, Drupal updates. When you run the updates, you expect no changes. Then you can do some updates to your theme, or you are pulling the changes from some upstream code. This is where you also want to check that pages look good. Another thing that is interesting is that we saw a lot of cases when visual regression testing was used for data migrations. Because we are talking about taking screenshots of the web pages and checking them before and after you did the changes, if you're running data migration from, let's say, older system, and you have thousands of pages that you want to check, there's no way you can manually go and check them. But the way you usually write the migrations, you don't migrate everything at once. You pull certain types of the content, certain, let's say, paragraphs or elements or blocks, and then you place them on different pages, and then you import images, and then you import some other assets, or maybe more content types. And that is kind of like um, process where you want to track the changes that are happening across the whole website. So this is where visual regression testing can help you to take screenshots before you deploy another round of migrations. And then you will be able to see, okay, now we're expecting, let's say, this block to appear on 10 pages of the website. And now we can see proof that it appeared. Or we are migrating images, and now we have proof that images got migrated. Or sometimes you can migrate one thing and break something else. And this is where actually a robot that will go and take screenshots of all your pages makes a lot of sense. Another use case that is pretty popular is the visual monitoring of the website. So let's say you have a dynamic website where multiple editors make changes, different like developers can deploy the changes, and you also want to keep tracking those changes visually. In this way, if something goes wrong, and this kind of like corresponds to the next item in my list, that is Wayback Machine. If you need to see how your page looked, let's say 2 months ago, when you ran a certain campaign, you will be able to do that if you run monitoring frequently enough. So this is a way for you to be more proactive in your maintenance. So you can see also the content changes and if nothing goes broken, and if something gets broken, even from editorial perspective, you can track that back to the certain date. And then of course you can go back into revisions in your Drupal side, and then you can see who did those changes if you need to go that far. And then there was another interesting use case that is happening in certain industries where visual archive makes sense, is when you need to do very detailed review of the copy of the site. So we are talking about different legal websites, different websites related to pharmaceutical industry. So one of the common things they do, when they do edits to the site, they do them kind of like on staging environment, and then they push them all together to production. And before they do that, they have a full process of reviewing those content changes. And this is where they take screenshots of every single page. In like I don't want to go into details, but it's very it's very detailed review process, and the people who do this review, they look at the screenshots mainly. They don't go through the website, so they go through screenshots, they annotate them, and this is something that the crawler like you can do this with Diffie as well. You can download all the screenshots at once, but the idea is that if you need to package the website for review in this way, tools like Diffie can help you with that. Okay, let's move on. When do you need testing? Especially visual testing. There are kind of like two extremes in the approach. So, one is that some projects, they do not have budget for testing. Also, it's a known thing that in some cases testing needs maintenance, especially if it's functional testing and you change things around the site. And you change functionality. And also people just say like, oh, we just do everything manually. Uh, this is the approach that everyone starts with. But then when you keep doing the same testing, the problem happens that people start skipping it. And this is where the problem starts creeping in, because you could start cut the corners. Let's say we have a set of test suites and we execute them, but sometimes we start cutting corners in terms of like if we touch just that particular part of the site, this is the piece we are testing, but we don't test everything else. And you might discover some bugs way later in your in your timeline, and then it will be pretty hard for you to find the link between the bugs that you got introduced and when you did those releases. So in that regard, I just want to warn you that, of course, every project starts without any tests, and then you need to gradually evolve and get to some kind of automation. So that is kind of like one extreme where people just don't do anything. And then there is another extreme in testing coverage is that people start saying like, oh, we do testing of every single piece of functionality, every page, everything that can be tested, we test it. Um, this is great if people have budgets for that, but I never truly worked on such projects. And this is not I recommend either because it's really expensive and with today's speed of iterations, it will just slow you down a lot. So in this case, when you have these two extremes, you always want to get somewhere in the middle. And what I do like is the story of Drupal core itself. When automated testing got introduced, nobody said like, okay, we stop the whole development, we just focus on automated testing and we spend years on implementing it. No, the approach was that every new feature needs a test, but and everything we change needs a test. But everything that was running before that, we assume that it's running correctly. And then over the time, test coverage expanded, and then people had way more stable product in the end. Um, Another thing that is happening right now in terms of the testing is that writing tests as well as any code is getting way cheaper right now in terms of using like AI for writing it. And the great thing is that because of that, there are a lot of tools that are coming up on the market to help you with testing and writing tests. There are a lot of frameworks that can help you. So definitely don't think that if you looked at the testing, let's say 5 years ago, and it was very big undertaking to write them, now it's way cheaper and way faster to do. So try out something, find the tool that you really like or you have a good support, and start adding the tests to your projects. Um, when people just starting with testing, and visual regression testing in particular, what I usually recommend is that first you want to get the easy wins, and easy wins meaning to free your own time. So let's say you have a website and every time you do deployments, you check those 10 pages. Uh, Automate testing those 10 pages, and that will be already great benefit. You will save yourself 10, 15 minutes every time you do deployment, and then you can add more testing on top of it. That is one approach. Another thing is that if you see something is getting broken time to time, cover that piece of website with tests. So let's say um, some section on the About Us pages is getting broken a few times in the last couple of releases, and that is because CSS just got too complex. Then cover that particular pages with testing and move on. And remember again that every project starts without any tests, and you just want to see what pages deserve automated testing and target them as fast as you can so you don't break most important parts of your site. Um, from my experience, when sites actually get broken, usually it happens in multiple scenarios. So first scenarios I look for is that if the site is pretty old and especially when it moved through different agencies or different developers even. Actually, the story of Diffie was exactly this. I worked at the agency at the time, and we got the project that we were agency probably number 5 or 6, um, maintaining the website. And website was the um, network of legal attorneys in United States. And the tricky part was that it was very, very important for those attorneys to have their profiles done right. And if you, let's say, miss or drop the line of their publications or their degrees or something about them, that was a big problem for them. And there was a website of like 500 attorneys, and there were a lot of customizations to each profile. And this is where things got like really out of control. And that was probably like 10 years ago, and CSS files even on that project were like 7,000 lines. So it was really, really hard to maintain and understand that you are changing something and what effects are going to be through the website. So if you have a situation like this one, definitely look into visual regression testing. Another thing where you would really like to use testing like this one is when you have a lot of dependencies. So let's say you have a base theme, and then you have your theme that you develop for your multiple websites or for university, like style guides, and then you have your theme that is developed as child theme from that university level theme. So if you have like two, three themes upstream, whenever there are changes, they will come down to you, and you need to make sure that even update doesn't break anything. And that can happen, especially if you're using frameworks with um, different classes. And remember when we were moving even between Bootstrap versions, the class names changed, and sometimes your customizations can fall off. And another thing that I would recommend you visual regression testing if you not just using a theme, but you have a lot of overrides. So the more overrides you do, more kind of like on your own you are. And this is where you need to look at your code base and then see. But if you have too many things and they get convoluted, and you probably will have some bugs that are coming in. And that's another sign that you need to improve your testing. Um, some things about visual regression testing. When people are asking me, okay, well, I want to onboard this particular website, what pages shall we start testing? So I usually recommend one of two approaches. So the first approach is that you know your website very well. You know you want to cover all the unique layout pages. So let's say you have your content types, pick a couple of different articles from each of the content type. Then you have different landing pages. Make sure they are in the list. And then maybe you have some pages that are very unique from all the rest. You want to cover them. You don't need to think about visual regression testing. It's like, oh, I need every single page on the site. That will be very long to do the testing. It will be very hard for you to review. And you don't want to test the same page, even different content, multiple times. You want to be efficient on that. So that is one approach if you know your website really, really well. Another approach could be check your analytics. If you have analytics solution where you can see what pages got the most traffic, let's say cover the top 20. Because if something gets broken on some page that nobody looks at, I mean, it's bad, but it's not as bad as you got something that happened on the page that is 10 on the list. That will be exposed way more. And similar approach with the breakpoints. You know when your website layout changes, and that is also important moment because you want to cover all the different breakpoints. So you don't want just to check your desktop. You also want to have your phone or tablet. Again, you can either go with your knowledge of the theme and when the breakpoints happen, or you can check your analytics and see the most popular devices as well. Okay, before we go into tools, because there are a lot of them, do you have any questions? And Emily, please let me know if there are any that are coming in the chat.
Yes, definitely. Robert says, another suggestion when choosing a page is having a pattern library blocks test page so you can quickly check all the different block types on a single page.
Hmm, that's a great comment. So another approach to testing that I saw is that people build a style guide where they have a couple of pages on the website. It's kind of like not exposed to all the visitors. There is no link on anywhere, but those pages are assembled with all the different types of blocks, paragraphs, whatever system you're using in your site. In this way, they test those pages first, and then you can see the behavior of your components is kept intact. And then, of course, you cover with tests some like actual pages. But it's a great idea and a great approach to have those specific pages just for visual regression testing, where you can see that, and you can assert that your blocks and your components didn't break. Thank you, Robert.
Are there any other questions before we move on? Nothing else in chat at the moment.
Okay, okay, that's great. So regarding the tools, it appeared that idea of taking screenshots of the pages is not new. There are a lot of different solutions to that. And so I set up monitoring of Reddit for visual regression testing. And I can tell you, like every week or every couple of weeks, there is a new tool that's coming up. So it's very easy to build a tool that does screenshots, but it's hard to build the one that will actually do them right. So the best list of different tools I found that is available on GitHub. But there are a lot of different types, different approaches to visual regression testing. So, for example, what Diffie does and Backstop.js, another alternative, does we take screenshots of the full page. So we spin up the browser, we open the page, we take the screenshot, maybe do some little manipulations, and then take the screenshot. But the idea is that you have an archive of the whole page screenshots. That's one approach to this. Another approach is that if you're using components library, let's say Storybook, there are solutions that more tailored to taking screenshots of those components in isolation. And it's also can be done with Diffie. If you have those components aligned, or you have those components maybe compiled and you have a separate website where you just have them. But there are tools that are tailored specifically to the components libraries of different types. Then there is a visual regression testing tools that actually kind of like part of functional testing. So for example, there is a Ghost Inspector, there is Percy from Browser Stack, but idea is that in Ghost Inspector, you can record different actions and you can do asserts in the end, like that you had success message or you had some, like whatever you do in functional testing. But also you can take screenshots along the way and you can compare the results or compare the runs between themselves so you can see if something went wrong visually. Percy, for example, is more sophisticated. You do need to code your functional tests and take screenshots along the way and then send them to Percy or whatever technical level it works right now. But the idea is that it's very tightly coupled with functional tests. Then there are tools that do monitoring. And monitoring, I mean, we are web developers. We think about monitoring about in terms of like, hey, this is the website where my clients are making changes. I want to be aware of those changes. But visual testing in general, there is a big use case in the world that people are using it for tracking changes on the site. For example, when the sale go off, or I don't know, tickets to your concert become available, or there is a discount on certain websites. So there is this whole different level of visual monitoring that is available, and some people use it for monitoring their websites as well. But of course, they have when they approach like different problems, there are different tools for those particular problems. And also functional testing frameworks, they also can take screenshots and you can compare them later. So for example, Playwright, it can take screenshots as well. And by the way, this is how it does it. You just take the screenshot, or you can say, okay, take the screenshot of the full page, and that's it. So why would you need all that um, visual regression testing tools and everything? Well, it appeared that it's not that easy to take those screenshots. So I have a few examples, and one of them is Adaptive. That's a agency. So first, oh, I need to bring up the website. So this is how the website look like. And you can see there are a few things that are happening here. When you scroll down, the header is sticky and you have some dynamic elements and you really need to scroll things in order to load the content. And this is how the screenshots will look like in different tools. So this is an example of the backstop without any configuration. I'm sure it can do better, but if you just do it, it will bring something like this. And then there's a Hexawatch. That's a tool for monitoring. It does much better because you can see that most of the elements are there. But now you have the cookie pop-up and still some elements might not load. And then this is the screenshot if you run it with Playwright. Okay. So similar thing to Backstop, but better. It takes the screenshot at least from the header properly, but you still have a cookie pop-up. It's easy to remove, but you need to take care of it. And then I think I had another example of Visual Paint. That's another monitoring solution. That's actually one of the most advanced ones I found, but still you can see that some blocks do not render properly. And you can say, okay, this is the website that is complex, and maybe I specifically picked it up. And of course, I did. Here's another website that is much simpler. This is kind of like one page, actually nearly one screen page. And here are some examples how the screenshot is taken. So this one is not bad. You do have this cookie pop-up, you can work around it, but most of the elements are there. This is the Playwright, also pretty nice. But there is one problem, it doesn't show the footer at all. So all those screenshots you take, and this is the visual pane. Again, no footer, unfortunately. And the backstop, very similar screenshot as well. So when you start taking screenshots from real website with some dynamic element, it's getting non-trivial very, very fast. And one of the best examples, I think, let me bring this down. Nothing beats this type of website, if you get it. So this is the website kind of like on extreme in terms of the complexity, because you have all these elements moving, video is playing, this thing is driving your attention. They even have the phone numbers actually changing dynamically based on whatever campaign they're running. And you can see that there are a lot of different sliders and moving elements, and there's another slider that is different, and then you have even more sliders, and you have hover effects, and you have more dynamic elements. So this website, like standard tools, just no chances to render properly unless you spend a lot of time actually stabilizing them. So the problem of taking screenshots, it sounds very easy and fast, but in reality, when you start taking them and you start actually noticing the discrepancies, it's an interesting problem to solve. Even taking the screenshot from the full page is non-trivial thing, because the thing is that if there are two approaches to this, you can open the page in a very tall browser, like you can set, let it be 20,000 pixels tall, but then you hit problems like if there are certain elements that have height based on the height of the browser, like a viewport, they will be stretched. And then you also hit the memory consumption. Browsers are very RAM intensive. Or there's another approach that is taking the smaller viewport and then taking screenshots one after another and glue them together. That is another approach that, for example, I think Backstop.js used at certain point. The problem is with the dynamic elements that are kind of like sticky elements. If you have a sticky header, you will have it on every single viewport, and then if you merge them together, you will just have so many headers that you don't really need. So Diffie runs with a very tall browser, but we have developed a lot of JavaScript code that goes through DOM and looks if there are some elements that have percentage-based or vertical unit-based height CSS properties. We try to override them. It catches probably like 80% of cases, but still there are some cases where we need manually to intervene and write those CSS rules to override them. And now when you're dealing with all these issues with the screenshots, you would need to have some tools. And there are a few things that are kind of like standard for visual regression testing tools. You do want to you do want to be able to have a delay before taking screenshots just to make sure that all the assets are loaded. You want to be able to scroll the page, so lazy loading did its job. You want to remove elements, let's say cookie pop-ups, and you want to mask elements. Masking means you want to ignore certain areas because they are going to be too dynamic. For example, Google Maps or any maps, they change without notifying you. And if you just take screenshots of those elements, they will be different over and over, and you will have those false positives. And then you also need to deal with different fonts, assets loading, dealing with CDNs. So sometimes you do need to install even additional fonts to your server that is taking screenshots. There are more advanced tools for screenshots that we use a lot. So injecting JavaScript and CSS. So CSS is to override these tall elements. The JavaScript is for freezing carousels, stopping videos, whatever you can imagine, like most of the elements that are dynamic on the page, you need to inject some JavaScript to deal with them. So you would definitely need that. Sometimes you do need to also tamper with HTTP headers, cookies, if you have different pop-ups based on the, like, I don't know, if you ask something from people on the website and you have this pop-up and you change actually how the site look like based on their answers, and you keep those answers in the cookie, this is where you would need to emulate those interactions. Night mode, enforcing retina images, mocking content even. So mocking content is the concept of if you have dynamic elements on the page, let's say testimonials, and they change all the time, you just randomly pull them. You want to keep that element on the page. You want to take screenshots, but you don't want to deal with a different copy of those elements. So what you do, you inject JavaScript that will replace the copy with some lorem ipsum text, and we have it out of the box. CDNs. So it's much easier to test the site when it's locally. It's much harder when it's production environment because you have protection. For example, Cloudflare, it will block if you're coming from Amazon pool of servers. So this is where what we do at Diffie, we have an option to make it so all the workers are coming from the single IP address, and then you just allow that IP address to bypass your CDN protection. So that is a very handy thing when you're dealing with production issues. And another thing is that limiting number of workers is also important. If you have the site locally, you're probably running with a single process. If you have site on production, you can run it with 10, 20, 30 workers, and that will be much faster. If you're doing dev or staging environment, running 30 concurrent browsers might just break it down. So you do want to be able to control that number of workers as well. There's also possibility to log into the site. So let's say you're running updates and your CK editor disappeared, or you had some JavaScript error that made your admin's experience broken. In that case, you do want to cover the admin experience with visual regression testing as well. And what Diffie does for that, we just open the page slash user page or whatever page you have your login form. We submit the credentials, and then we go to the page that you have in the settings. So in this way, we log into the site multiple times. All right, let me show you a few things around Diffie, what makes it unique comparing to other tools. So this is the project layout. These are the sets of screenshots. These are the sets of comparisons. And if we go to the comparisons, first of all, the UI is based on thumbnails. So you can review the thumbnails and you can already approve just by looking from thumbnails, and you can switch between the breakpoints. But probably the most unique thing about Diffie is not the slider. Slider is present on most of the visual regression testing tools, is the comparison algorithm. So idea is that we don't just compare images pixel by pixel, but we have a custom solution that recognizes the vertical shifts. So you can switch to pixel perfect, but you can see that in this case, there was a change in the header and it shifted the whole content down. And that will generate you a lot of noise that will be hard to understand. So that was one of the advantages of Diffie comparing to other tools. And then we host everything in the cloud. It's pretty easy for you to share the results with the teams. So we have shareable links. If, for example, your QA person did the review and they found some bugs, and you can mark them, by the way. And in that way, once you did the review, you can just put it in your Jira ticket or whatever ticketing system you use. Another thing that we do in Diffie that is unique, that we recognize the same change across multiple screenshots. So in this case, the change is in the header, and we have 3 pages, and this change is on each of the page. So we can mark all of them as a bug or as expected change. And then if you go to the project settings, you will be able to see all those different things that I mentioned already. So injecting JavaScript, CSS, headers, scrolling, all these you can find here as well. So, and we have a free tier right now that is limited by number of screenshots that you generate. So if you have a project that you would like to try out Diffie, you're more than welcome, and you can reach out to me on Intercom, and I will help you with customizations to make sure that your screenshots will not have false positives. Okay, let's go back to the presentations. So we have thumbnails, individual changes. I think I covered it all. We also save HTML and JavaScript console log if you need to debug something. For example, if you see that some elements disappeared, sometimes it's because of the JavaScript error, and you can find out that. Another thing that is more unique with Diffie is that we shipped it with CLI tool. So if you want to integrate it with your pipelines, it's pretty easy to do. So this is an example of actually 4 lines that you would be using if you have pull request environments. So if you use something like Tugboat or Pantheon's multi-dev environments, and you have those environments available in your pull requests, then you just download the Diffie CLI tool, you authenticate it, and then you kick off the job that compares your production with that pull request environment. And that is just a few lines of code. And other things that I would recommend you to look at is the notifications. So email, Slack. We also have GitHub Action. So we can post the results back to your pull request. or we can post the results as the comments in your GitLab as well. Another thing that we built with for Diffie is the integration with local development environments. So if you're using DDEV or Lambda or Doxal, there are plugins for them. Actually, if you're using Docker in general, we ship the container that you can download and you can start taking screenshots from your local website. And then you can upload those screenshots back to Diffie for the comparison. The same way it works with, let's say you exported those screenshots from your Figma. You can compare them to your actual site. Or Playwright, again, you have functional tests and you take screenshots at certain points. You can save those screenshots in a directory and then you can upload them to Diffie. So you can do that. You can run the test on production and then you can run it on your, let's say, staging environment and compare them even during the functional test. And the last topic is about artificial intelligence, because it's a hot thing and every session should have it. So our experiments with AI were not as successful as you could imagine. So AI is amazing in describing the changes between the screenshots. So it can tell you if the whole section disappeared or copy changed. So for those type of changes, it's amazing, but it will not tell you, at least right now, about different padding or maybe something that shifted just a little bit. So we didn't have much success on that part because the visual regression testing is still it's still visual, like human need to look at it. And the good thing is that it takes you not much time to actually go through the screenshots or the comparisons and understand whether changes are relevant or those are bugs. Um, so that is where AI is used. We do work on making a summary of changes. This is something we would like to make more useful. It's still pretty early, but the idea is that when you have a website, let's say you're comparing 100 pages, and there are a lot of different changes across the set of the screenshots, you want system to tell like, hey, there was a certain changes that happened on these 5 pages, and then there are, let's say, 10 occurrences of some other change, so you have some kind of summary. Um, so that is something that is on our roadmap, and this is where we see the AI being used in Diffie. Okay, I think I went through all the slides. Another thing that I would recommend you to go, we have a documentation website, so it's docs. And this is where you can find, for example, all the snippets that I mentioned about CLI tool, or um, let's see, local development, if you're using DDEV, commands that you can use to install the plugin, etc. So definitely look at these pages when you're evaluating Diffie comparing to other tools, because there are a lot of different edge cases that we covered, and they are demonstrated in documentation. Okay, thank you very much for the attention, and I'm happy to answer any questions you have.
Thanks so much, Yuri. Awesome. We have a couple of things from chat. Earlier at about 1:30, Justin said, "Oof, looks like that site is an accessibility nightmare." Justin, do you want to expand on that? I'm not exactly sure where you're talking about that. If Justin's still on.
That's probably about some of the sites that I demonstrated. Like this
Yeah.
one will be really tough. I
Yeah.
totally
Oh,
agree.
yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
there are a lot of issues with this site, but I mean, you need to test it as well.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, it was probably more just a comment. And then Robert has a question. What are some super user features you wish more people knew about Diffie for those already using it?
Hmm. So we discovered that a lot of people are actually um, when they see some elements being stretched, even some basic things like stretched element, they think that it's a normal thing and it's just the floor of the tool. It's not. We have ways to actually work around them and inject those CSS rules and work on them and make things really pretty. So that is one big thing. Another thing that I would definitely recommend you to look into is the integration with the other systems, like with your CI workflows, or if you use some functional testing frameworks like Playwright, Behat, whatever you use. If you want to take screenshots of particular elements, you can do that in those tools, and then again use Diffie to check them, like production versus staging or whatever workflow you have. So I think these are the more advanced features, but they are pretty often overlooked.
Great. And someone who joined, Jay Koplowitz, had to drop early, but he says, thank you for an excellent talk. And I think that's it from chat. And yeah, Justin confirmed that was the site mentioned about the motion, which I have trouble with too. Sometimes those kind of ones that jump out at you. Cool. Anything else from anybody?
Yeah, I also wanted to mention that what makes Diffie another unique thing is that it can be used by non-technical people. So once you set it up, I had multiple cases when project managers did the testing when they sign off on the release, when people who do manual QA sign off when they do the release. So it's the tool that will allow you to do this type of more sophisticated testing, but without involving developers every single time. So that is a big thing. And Diffie is being adopted with a lot of agencies in Drupal world, but also universities as well. So, for example, Stanford has I think 3, 4 different groups that are using the tool quite extensively. Also, there is Princeton, there is Georgetown University, there are a few smaller colleges. So it's being used in situations when you have a small team but large number of sites. And you can imagine that it's very, very common in academia nowadays because you can have web services team that is 5, 10 people, but you have thousands of websites that you need to maintain.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Yuri. Appreciate the talk. And we'll see everyone else in a 2 p.m. session in about 10 minutes. Thanks so much.
Thank you very much for having me. Take
Bye.
care.